I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this edition of Voices from the Village. Tonight we'll be talking about defending the rights of homeless folks. I'm really pleased to have with me to talk about this topic, which is really important not only nationally, but there's a lot of local focus. Robert Norse, co-founder of Huff and Freedom Sleeper, and Robert Aguirre. Robert, educator and advocate for homeless folks, and was one time the mayor of the jungle, as I understand, in San Jose. So really welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Both of us, all of us were at an event at the Resource Center for Nonviolence just early this evening, talking about homeless rights in general, talking about the Freedom Sleepers, talking about your work in San Jose. We will be expecting Tristia Bauman, who'll be our third guest. She is, of course, as we know, the staff attorney for the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. So when Tristia gets here, we will plug her into the conversation. But let's get started. Robert, maybe people don't know some of your background about how you became such a staunch homeless advocate. So give us a little background about how you came to that, and then how you got back into the Freedom Sleepers.
Well, I've been doing this for about, 25 years in Santa Cruz. It's really hard to say. I've seen people abused by police on the streets. I've had a feeling that in Santa Cruz kind of became an affectionate community for me. I heard about a woman running for election in 1988 concerned about the rights of the homeless. She actually went on a hunger strike to establish the first cold and rainy night shelter, Jane Imler.
Oh, okay, right.
And so I began working her campaign. We began tabling downtown to mobilize homeless people who became mobilized, which is harder to do these days.
Of course,
but then it was happening. So the issue, again, then as now had to do, we tried actually to make small gains in terms of warning people before they would get tickets in their vehicle. But the basic issue of, the fact that we have vacant buildings all over the city. Right. You have a T-shirt on yourself. I was in the building, support the Santa Cruz 11. That was one of the issues they were involved in 4 or 5 years ago.
To repurpose vacant space for community efforts. Yeah.
Right. We focused in this organization. I and others formed Huff Homeless United for Friendship and Freedom on the issue of the right to sleep. But it's not just the right to sleep. It's the right to survive, the right to be around in public spaces, the right to get a minimum, a basic standard, the right to be treated like a full and human, dignified person. And we attacked it from the perspective of, we figured the middle class community would understand that the right to sleep is a sort of a primary precondition to that.
And Robert, your work is, as I understand it, been primarily in Santa Clara County.
Primarily.
And you've done so much good work. Tell us about how you got involved in being an advocate and an educator.
Well, I've been in advocacy for quite a long time. Actually, my early days I was marching with Cesar Chavez, so I got a little bit of taste of that back then. But as far as the homeless, working with homeless, that started maybe about 2 years ago when I found myself homeless. I've been off and on for 15 years, but this last time my wife and I ended up living in the jungle, which was a large encampment, which was the largest encampment in the United States.
I understand it was 68 acres or something? 68 acres?
68 acres, wow. So a very, very large area. And as it started getting closer towards the end of its existence, they started squeezing people into a smaller, tighter place. And so I started reaching out to all the people that were living there to try to get as much contact information from them, and as well as the people that they were coming and providing different services, whether it be food or clothing or tents or whatever. And then also trying to get media. And so I have like 80 or 90 media people that I send notices to every time something's happening, and these press releases actually bring them out, which is really helpful. And then also have been establishing a lot of contact with the actual city council and board of supervisors.
The policymakers over there. We're really pleased to be joined now by Tristia Bauman. Tristia, welcome, staff attorney with the National Center for Homelessness and Poverty. We have a short clip that tells us a little bit about the National Law Center, and that'll introduce that, and then we'll come back and we'll have a little conversation.
Wonderful. Hello, I'm Maria Foscarinas. I'm founder and executive director of the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. The National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty is the only national organization dedicated solely to using legal advocacy to address homelessness. The combination of the foreclosure crisis plus unemployment have led to more and more people losing their homes, and some of them becoming homeless, either doubled up with friends or family because they can't afford their own place, or literally on the street, in a public place, or in a shelter bed. Even emergency resources like emergency shelters every night turn people away. They're simply not enough. It's a huge problem. It was a huge problem before the recession, and now it's grown even larger. And people who never imagined themselves being homeless, people who consider themselves formerly middle class, are now finding themselves seeking help at shelters, at food pantries, where they once were donors. They are now seeking help. We use the power of the law to promote solutions to end homelessness in America. We do this in 3 ways. We work with Congress, also at the state and local level, on new laws and policies to address homelessness, to end it. We also work on this through education. We get information out to homeless people who often don't know that they have rights. For example, homeless children have the right to go to school. Their parents are often unaware of it. We get the information out to them. And third, when rights are violated, we go to court to correct that. So, for example, if a homeless child is kept out of school, our attorneys will be in court to correct the problem for that child and set a precedent for thousands of others. In a country as wealthy as ours, no one should have to be homeless. Housing is a basic human right. We need to push until we make that right a reality here in the United States. A young girl in Louisiana called us. She had been homeless. She was on her own. She had fled violence in her home. She was without any family support. She had managed to get into college on a scholarship, but she was about to lose her scholarship because she was aging out. We were able to find a way for her to extend the scholarship in the law that she hadn't been able to find on her own. And so with our intervention, she was able to continue, get her education, get her degree, and now she's studying for her MBA and looking for a way to help other youth like her. There are many ways that you can get involved in supporting us. The most important for us is to support us financially. The work we do isn't free. We're very cost effective. We operate on a very modest budget, but we still need support. We really rely on committed, concerned people like you to support our work. But more than that, get involved by getting informed, getting educated on the issue, speaking out about it in your community. Sign up for our free e-newsletter. Get informed, stay in touch with us, learn about the issues. What we really need is to build an informed constituency that is educated and cares about the issues of homelessness and poverty. So please support us financially if you can, but stay connected with us, be involved, and you can make a difference.
And that certainly a wonderful piece about the National Law Center. And Tristia, we're really delighted to have you here. Again, welcome. You were kind enough not only to come over to the RCNV and be part of the Sleeping is a Right program that we had over there, but to come over here and in community television and give us some of your time. Tell us about the work of the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty and about your work with them.
Sure. So I'm a senior attorney at the National Law Center. I do a number of things, but the focus of my work is on protecting the civil rights of homeless people. We use several different strategies in order to achieve that. One, impact litigation strategies, so we do get involved in cases where we see a real strategic opportunity to make a difference at a systemic level. We also do a lot of education and outreach, issue reports on the criminalization of homelessness, for example. We've done 11 such reports and have another one upcoming on criminalization of homeless veterans.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah, that will be released sometime early 2016. And we also engage in policy advocacy advocacy at the international, national, state, and local levels as well on a number of issues, with criminalization of homelessness being a core focus.
It's interesting, one of our good friends and a longtime homeless advocate here, Ed Fry, who you may have met this evening, has often talked about the international implications of homelessness. That is a human rights issue that people are addressing. Now, how is that being addressed by the National Law Center?
You know, I actually think that the strategy employed by the Law Center is unique and really can be used more broadly. And in fact, other European nations feel the same way, and they asked us to come this summer to speak to a coalition of groups there about how we can use international law instruments to affect domestic change. And we do have, of course, a report on that as well. But some of these statistics are the specifics. There are a few treaties that the nation has both signed and ratified. And some of those implicate housing rights. And in addition to lobbying surrounding the review of those treaties, we also have lobbied embassies in part of the Universal Periodic Review process to make recommendations to the United States surrounding criminalization of homelessness. So recently, the Human Rights Committee stated that criminalizing homelessness is cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, which is sort of the corollary, international corollary to the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment.
Of course, yeah.
And we also were able to secure a recommendation to the United States from one of the embassies that we lobbied during the recent UPR process surrounding criminalization, and the United States accepted that recommendation to address the criminalization of homelessness.
Well, I want to remind people that this is a live call-in show, so if you have a question for any of our panelists, you can reach us at 425-8848, extension 30, I think that is. And I've got a gadget right here on my table that'll be able to take those. And we also have a stand-up mic, so if there are questions from the audience, you are certainly more than welcome to ask those of our panelists. Robert, Tristia has spoken of the international effort to address homeless rights and homelessness, and certainly we'll be talking in a bit about kind of the national effort and local efforts as well. What is your overview of what's happening here in Santa Cruz? Of course, you are the co-founder of HUF, Homeless United for Friendship and Freedom, but also a freedom sleeper along with myself and many others. Where are we in homeless rights in Santa Cruz?
Lots of talk, cold people outside, a winter armory shelter that is only houses 100 and many people don't want to go to it. A sleeping ban and a camping ordinance in place that criminalizes homeless, less enforced because I think of the freedom sleepers, but because of the national, perhaps, legal implications of Boise versus Bell and the actions of other city councils throughout the Northwest. Vancouver, Washington is one of them. I think Glendale, California is another, that have actually suspended their camping ordinances, or at least at night, in taking after what Los Angeles and San Diego have done, based on a much earlier thing called the Jones decision, which is sort of the grandfather, or at least the uncle of all this stuff. But the reality is we're doing a lot of talking, and people are out there essentially suffering abuses every night, fear that they're going to be arrested, fear that their property is going to be confiscated, as happens before and after the freedom sleeps that we do every Tuesday night, that we have been doing. And they'll probably be happening, I don't know when we're a live broadcast, it'll be happening in 2 nights. There will be another sleep out. I don't know if it's done officially by Freedom Sleepers or by the successor group, but we know activist Toby Nixon has come from San Jose to do that. I'm veering a little bit away from your question because I think what's important is that we do something. Not simply that we have an interesting intellectual discussion, the intellectual implications, all the legal precedents. Very interesting. I'm interested in that stuff. But the real question is, what can we do tonight and tomorrow to change this situation? And I think numbers of people on the streets have, I think the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement of African Americans throughout the country, whether under the rubric of Black Lives Matter or not, has showed us that the response of authorities is to the threat to their power by a countervailing power. And that's what we need to find.
And I know that I'll share with you as a Freedom People myself that we had really hoped, I think, to kind of drive policy in Santa Cruz and to be able to get our city council to at least consider programs that were addressing, some of the really unsheltered situations we have. Most recently, we suggested to them that they have some RV safe space sleeping zones, and of course we advocated for that strongly at council, continued to petition them at city council. It went to city council and was soundly defeated.
So in fact, they criminalized RVs at night. That was their response
right.
instead.
And so there is movement. There's a conscious and concerted effort to get to drive this policy, as certainly the National Law Center is trying to do. Robert, you're listening to the other Robert here, and certainly there's a commonality with what's happening in San Jose and Santa Clara County.
Right. Both the city and the county are now working on a safe parking program. Again, it's also a pilot program where they've identified 2 potential sites where they're going to allow 15 people to come and be able to stay there and be safe overnight. They're going to provide security. They're going to have trash cans and porta potties and things like that for the people that are camping there. And the idea is that if this really takes off, if it works really well, then they're going to expand the program and try to bring it into different areas.
Well, how were you able to, as an activist, to drive policy there? Because, for instance, what we're talking about, the RV Safe Spaces program that actually I developed here in Santa Cruz, that we suggest to our city council, soundly defeated, and it was almost word for word the program that you're suggesting here. Either we didn't advocate for it strongly enough, we weren't able to drive policy effectively enough. How did you get that done?
Well, basically what we do is we start forming partnerships with different council members, and you can't convince everybody all at once, but you can certainly convince a few people at a time. So by doing that, then you get them to advocate for you to the other council members, and of course you have to be careful of the Brown Act that you don't complicate things for them as well.
Sure, of course.
But there's certainly ways that you can go about that, and like some of the people are working on safe parking, some of the people are working on legal campsites, others are working on church sanctuary, which is another thing that just passed right now. The city has decided they're going to completely ignore their laws, saying that you can only shelter 15 people, and they can only be for 35 days in the calendar year. So they've decided that they're just not going to enforce that. They're just going to allow that to happen because they realize that the problem is so large that they can't afford to just ignore it. We've already had 3 people in Santa Clara County that have died and frozen to death. And last year we had, I don't know how many people that did. I know some personally that died from being exposed to the cold. So the county has responsibility for the health and welfare of the people, all the people within the county. So they realize that they have to do something about this situation. So that's what's the impetus in getting them to do that.
And of course, much of this is a reaction to the rise in criminalization of homelessness all over our state. And Tristia, you mentioned at the forum this evening the national trend toward criminalizing homelessness.
That's right. We have seen an explosive growth of criminalization policies across the country. As I mentioned, the Law Center has been tracking the failure of these policies for 2 decades. Most recently, we reported in 2014 about the rise of laws since our prior report on the issue in 2011. And we saw, for example, a 60% increase in laws that criminalize the act of camping in public places, where camping can be broadly defined to include sleeping in a tent or even merely sleeping outside.
Steve, should communities wait for government? I mean, I'm glad that you've been successful kind of in small ways. San Jose is the 3rd largest city in the state. It's huge.
In the country.
And yeah, I mean, and indeed in Fresno, for instance, and I guess in Sacramento, private individuals began these efforts. I mean, we have homeless encampments in Santa Cruz that need trash pickups today. They need porta potties today. Are we going to wait around till we can convince a council member to fund it in the next budget? Or can individuals privately go out there and address these issues, maybe dynamic organizations that form, which I don't see actually in the cards at the moment, but I'm just wondering, the whole focus here seems to be on getting government to respond, getting the laws changed, taking what is essentially a slow court process. This is not going to save people from freezing in Santa Cruz or in San Jose, or in the broader loss of life of 20 years that we predict, the less lifespan that a homeless person has.
And I think that's a good point. As Robert was mentioning, there has been some movement in Santa Clara County for faith communities to engage on this. We have an exception in our camping ban here in Santa Cruz that allows the faith community, each faith community, to have 3 campers on their property. Right. That would be an example of the faith community as a non-governmental agency, a non-governmental organization coming in and saying, you know what, we're going to make it there's 144 churches, for instance, between where we're sitting now and Freedom, which is about 10 miles away. If any of those or all of those decided they were going to have an RV safe spaces parking program, then you could make a real dent in the number of people.
And how many have, Steve? You've been working with this program for quite a while.
Very few. And I don't know the answer to that, Robert. I don't know why there hasn't been more civic engagement. Robert?
Right. Part of that is ignorance. And it's because they believe that people are going to be out of hand, they're going to be, creating problems for them, and they're concerned about the children.
Right.
And one of the arguments that I gave with them is if you really think that the homeless are really creating a problem, go look on Megan's list and see who your neighbors are. Right. So if you put it in that light, if you start letting people realize that what they're talking about are just regular people, and some of these churches have been set up there for families. They want families only, or they want men only, or they want women only, because they realize that if you start mixing, then you start getting a lot of different problems. It becomes hard to control. So one of the things that we're telling the churches too is that you answer to a higher authority, and that authority does give you permission to house anyone for as long as you want and as many as you want. Right. So if you want to follow the city's rules, well then that's up to you, but you want to follow God's law, then you can just do whatever you want on your property. And the Catholic Diocese has been very, very responsive to that. As a matter of fact, what they want is every church that has a shower to open up their showers to anybody. And they want them to be able to open up their bathrooms to anybody. They want them to be able to take families in. As a matter of fact, the challenge was to get the bishop to allow 2 families to come and move into his office. So,
well, that's a wonderful model that I wish that our faith communities were following here in Santa Cruz. Regrettably, there hasn't been much movement on that. Tristia, I wanted to go back to something that you had mentioned at the workshop at the RCNV. That you said that there's a rise in visible homelessness due to the lack of affordable housing.
That's right. So the affordable housing crisis is clear. We know that rents have continued to skyrocket since the foreclosure crisis began in 2007. We know that rents are now, for all Americans, 15% higher, and they perhaps are higher now, since this is 2014 data, than they were just 5 years ago. We know that that has also been exacerbated by a dramatic loss of federal funding for federally subsidized housing. We're losing about 10,000 federally subsidized housing units each year. Wow. And since the late 1970s, HUD's budget has been cut by 56% to the tune of billions of dollars. And so the faith-based community certainly has a role to play, but they cannot make up the gap that has been lost with the lack of federal investment in affordable housing. We do see some positive activity now at the federal level, in part as a result of international advocacy and advocacy of other national advocates. The Department of Justice brief in the Bellevue-Boise case has attracted a lot of attention, and that's starting to get stakeholders at the local level to pay more attention to their anti-camping bans. Right. But I think there is absolutely a very valid point. Do we wait until systemic change is accomplished before the average citizen feels a responsibility to the people who are freezing and being raped and being arrested outside as we speak here at this table? Right. Yeah. Of course, the answer is no. In a crisis, you don't wait for a systems change, but that's part of the solution.
And our system here has been particularly intransigent about this. I mentioned that they had voted down this RV Safe Spaces program. There was a companion item on the agenda that was brought forth by our Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, who said, let's try to create some RV Safe Spaces programs for people, for women who are in danger of suffering domestic violence, or members of our transgender community, and that didn't even pass. Wow. So we are getting to a point, I think, and maybe Robert will speak more about this, to a point where our political action, our direct action, does not seem to be making up much ground. And that perhaps we're thinking that litigation may be the next step in a strategy to really effectively challenge these things.
I think you can always, I think you should use a variety of avenues at the same time. But I think one of the problems here is viewing this as a problem of compassion and, oh, those poor homeless people, and let's appeal to people's hearts. I hear you doing this, and I can understand why you do it, but the issue seems to me you have to start appealing to self-interest among the larger group of renters that is getting ripped off all over the country, and in this city as well, by these massive increases, or even middle-class people who are struggling under massive mortgages and dealing with, the bankster fraud that we were, some of us, including you, Steve, were involved in with the Occupy movement
Santa Cruz,
4 years ago. If we can form broader coalitions around this of the people who are directly impacted, then whether we use litigation strategies or direct action strategies, we may get somewhere. I mean, and it's, I guess I'm saying the obvious, but I don't know that it has been really tried in an effective way here in Santa Cruz.
And certainly, those of us who are homeless advocates, and I myself, I'm the director of our local Homeless Persons Legal Assistance Project, and that's how we first connected, because we had sued the city over our stay-away ordinance litigation. And although we didn't really get very far, you were kind enough to kind of give us some consultation and give me an idea of kind of where we could go with that. You were saying also on the panel earlier that one of your partner law firms had been involved in the original Bellevue-Boise case, and of course that's now been dismissed, but the Bellevue-Boise reasoning, that wonderful articulation that the Department of Justice came up with, is still very compelling. I mean, I've had lay people read it and say, you know what, that makes perfect sense to me. It's easy to see, if you don't have shelter enough for a number of unsheltered folks in your community, and if you are criminalizing them because they don't have any place to sleep, then that's cruel and unusual, and it's a violation of the amendment. It's very clear. So does the National Law Center have any plans to maybe do some other litigation in other places?
Well, we always look for litigation opportunities, and challenging criminalization policies is, again, a core focus of the Law Center. About the Bellevue-Boise case, you're right that it has been dismissed on standing grounds, and it's also being appealed currently to the Ninth Circuit on that procedural issue. So we do continue to litigate that case along with Latham and Watkins, which is a very important pro bono partner that we work with. And we work with a number of major firms because, as you know, as an attorney who does this kind of work, there is a significant gap between the need for legal services on this issue and attorneys who are doing this type of work. And so engaging the private bar to do more of this work is a really critical part of the legal solution, and we're finding a lot of interest among our pro bono partners, which pleases us very much.
And we should really mention, I'll get to Elise in just a second because we do have a question from the audience, but I did want to mention that one of the folks I mentioned, Ed Fry, earlier. Ed is a local attorney who has spent hundreds of hours pro bono, trying to do what he can for people experiencing homelessness. So, it's wonderful, but we need a lot more Ed Frys.
Are you looking for plaintiffs in Santa Cruz?
Part of the reason I'm here is to do some factual investigation to find out what's happening. We're always looking to unearth possible cases because we do have interest among the pro bono partners. Now, I would never be able to say, especially now since I don't have enough sense of what the legal case might be, that yes, we're going to be marching into town and filing litigation. And we're, of course, as every organization that works on this issue, we're resource limited, but we do have a lot of very deep pocket law firm partners who are interested in engaging on this issue.
I mean, I'd heard that you came out to the West Coast in search of, at least among some cities, some way to, hook on to a legal case given the kind of things that are happening with Boise.
And of course, we're going to be editing it down, so the part where you said, yes, we're going to come marching into Santa Cruz is going to be played in several places, starting tomorrow morning. We have a question from the audience. Elise, please.
Yes, thanks very much. I heard at the RCNV event that our mayor, our city council, as well as one of the city council members, Micah Posner, is putting it on the agenda for the first city council meeting that's coming up in January to end the sleeping ban laws here. And I wanted to ask, and it seems that there's a lot of agreement among all the activists that have been speaking tonight, both here and over at the RCNV. How can we build those numbers? And is that city council event happening before the students get back to town? because as you were saying, Robert, we really need to build coalition and build numbers, get the students here, the people who pay rent in Santa Cruz, we're all getting ripped off, and kind of join forces and come to that city council meeting. Do you know what date that is, and are the students going to be back in town? And do you have any suggestions about what we could do to build numbers?
Well, I can answer part of that. We had a meeting recently with Micah Posner, who's one of our local council members, who has been a very, well, he's in his way, he has been an advocate for people experiencing homelessness. His dad, Rabbi Phil, was our moderator this evening, and our understanding is that the mayor, former mayor now, he was just termed it out, he passed the torch, is going to bring that to council either the end of January or early February. So to answer Elise's question, the students would certainly be back at that time. So there is a possibility of mobilizing that. Robert, you have some experience with mobilizing people and getting them to come to city council meetings and getting this show of force that you need. You know, tell us what you're...
Well, especially when it comes to the students, what you want to do is contact the teachers that teach social justice. And that's a very good start because it can become a project part of the class. And we've had large numbers of students show up only because it was going to affect their grade. Again, we don't care why they're there. They just fill the seats, they hold signs, and it delivers a message. The other thing I suggest is that you try to contact as much media as possible and get as much media coverage to come to your event. And they like controversy. So if you can word it in some way that, you know, kind of expresses that controversy, then they will come. They'll come in numbers. As a matter of fact, they'll come from all over. I've had people come from all over the Bay Area. I've had people from throughout the state. I've had people from, well, Mother Jones from, you know, across the country, and also internationally. Like when the jungle was closing, we made a big deal about it, and some reporters came down from China and took pictures, and the front cover of their news newspaper was America. What about human rights? You know. And normally I'll get a roll in as I did for the National Law Center or some to kind of introduce a guest. I was looking on YouTube at the number of YouTube. There were scores of YouTube clips having to do with the jungle and the existence of the jungle and the destruction of the jungle and the people who were driven away and that kind of thing with really no place to go. So you're right. You know, that does make a bit of a difference if you can get the kind of media coverage. Tristia, when you are involved with litigation at the National Law Center, are they also doing advocacy by lobbying public officials or something at different times?
One of the things that we have found in working with local communities is that litigation is a really important and powerful tool. But it's limited in its ability to affect the kind of change that we want to see, which is housing for everyone. And so there needs to be a coordinated policy response as well, and policy advocacy. I think the question regarding how to get the numbers necessary to get the city council members to pay attention to what the people are saying goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that's figuring out where there are intersections between homeless issues and other issues that are really sort of seizing the conscious of people at this time. Black Lives Matter is an example. Homelessness in Santa Cruz may not be a racial minority issue. It absolutely is on a national scale, and people might be interested in that there. There's a lot of attention paid to mass incarceration right now. Mass incarceration is happening if you're a homeless person. In fact, they're a population that's disproportionately affected by mass incarceration. That group might be interested. Homelessness is a family issue, which means it's a women's issue, women with children. And when 1 in 30 U.S. children is experiencing homelessness, and we know that women who are experiencing homelessness are disproportionately victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, this is a domestic violence issue. Youth who are homeless disproportionately identify as LGBTQ. This is an LGBTQ issue. And I mean, this really is a broad civil rights movement.
And it's interesting you say that. Robert, go ahead, please.
I was going to say also the elderly, because a lot of the elderly live in mobile home parks, and now there's a lot of conversion of mobile home parks, and so they find themselves also getting evicted. We also have over 300 students at San Jose State that are homeless. You know, we don't identify them, but we know who they are. But basically, it speaks to the fact that, you know, if you could be working on your higher education and still be suffering through homelessness. It affects everybody in so many different ways. And the more connections you make with the public on this sort of thing, a lot of parents know that their children are homeless because they can barely scrape enough money together to pay their tuition and their books and things, and so they know that they don't have enough money to really be staying in a dorm or something, so they know that they're homeless. But when you reach out to those people, they will come. They will come to represent all the different factors that are affecting homelessness.
I think that's an interesting, excellent point. Lise, who just asked the question a moment ago, is a member of the UCSC community here and also knows much about the homeless community there. So that's something that is a good resource for us to understand that there are homeless students. They are matriculating, but they simply don't have a place to live. And I would say also, Tristia, when you talk about crossover, between issues, I'm the vice chair of our ACLU of Santa Cruz County. One of our board members, Abby Samuels, in the audience with us here. But there are also significant, as you know, civil liberties issues. So we can try to get them engaged. I, in fact, have asked the Northern California affiliate, who provides all of our legal assistance. They don't want us to be a lawyer referral service. That's just the way they are. But I have asked them, to engage on a lawsuit here, at least take a look at what I believe to be, and Robert might be speak to this, a unique situation for homeless. And we have many thousands of homeless people, unsheltered people. You were talking about the point-in-time counts and how inaccurate they can be. Our last point-in-time count surveyed 2,000 homeless folks. The people who do our homeless census survey themselves admit those are underestimated by 50% or more. So we have 3,000 people. You were talking about 70,000 people.
Oh, 7,000 in the county.
7,000.
Over 7,000.
Yeah, 7,000 in the county. So there's a tremendous number of people, who are unsheltered, and that's the kind of thing that we need to address in whatever ways that we can. Robert?
Another group that actually has some legal clout is the disabled or otherly abled community, if you will, and that was something the ACLU in a statewide conference about 4 years ago considered as a wedge to try to go after sleeping bans. I think after the Jones settlement essentially killed that decision in Los Angeles as a basis for all of us appealing and saying, hey, it's a cruel and unusual punishment. Right. The court said so. Well, LA, the activists down there did a deal with, that often happens. And it happens in San Diego too with the Spencer settlement. I'm much as I'm fascinated with the whole legal aspect of things, it's I don't know what to call it, a crapshoot. It's a way of articulating very important issues and trying to see how they relate broadly to different populations across the country, how we all have that commonness. But I don't know that I have a profound mistrust also of the entire legal system here. That's one of the problems. It's dominated by reactionary conservative elements, and also the lawyer class itself is a privileged class. There are a few homeless lawyers, I guess, around, but not many. And it's part of a class system. And the class system itself is the problem, as far as I can see, the hierarchical system. Yeah. So that's a more profound problem. I know we're not talking about that fundamentally tonight, but it impacts this whole situation, and it impacts the strategies that we think we might want to use. I mean, we have one homeless person here. You're homeless these days?
Not at the moment.
one
formerly homeless person here, and possibly one in the audience.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there are, these diversity of tactics, different strategies. You and I, Freedom Sleepers, are talking about political action, direct action. Tristia talking about legal action, litigation. Robert, you're talking about things on the ground. And I think I would like to hear more, and our audience would like to hear more about these encampments that you have talked about that the San Jose City Council has approved. Right. And so give us some kind of a positive, upbeat idea of things that maybe are happening that maybe we can model after.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say that one of the council members is a formerly homeless attorney.
Oh, really?
So again,
speaking of crossovers,
right. So I mean, basically, again, you build with what you have, and you try to find every kind of corner that you can take advantage of, and that's the sort of thing. Now, speaking back to the encampment thing. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to change people's perception.
Change the narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No. So some of the times that we were showing the movies, the people came in and they just had a no. I'm not going to do this. We're not going to do this. But then after a while of actually seeing what's going on and what has gone on in Portland, for example, and there are other camps that have been very successful. There's a camp in Ventura that deals primarily with mental health and behavioral health issues. And it's been going for like 15 or 20 years, something like that. And it's supported by the county and by the city. So that, I mean, that's one thing you can look at. But they're looking very specifically at a target group that they're working with. Right. And then the group in Portland, and there's another one in Seattle. There's one in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They're all over the place, these encampments. And basically what the ones that are successful are peer-based. In other words, the people that are staying in the encampments have a say as to how it's run. And they also get a bit of pride of ownership because they have to pay money to be there. So you pay rent. It's not a lot of money. For example, overnight it's $1, right? So that's not a whole lot of money. You go out and pick up some cans and bottles and you can pick that money up pretty quickly. But what it does is it gives you a little bit of pride of ownership because now you're responsible for your area. You have your little trash can. You have all the stuff that you're responsible. Right. And once you start taking care of your area, then you're very concerned if your neighbor's not doing his part. And then so the peer pressure is what causes that one person or the group of people that aren't following rules to do that, to toe the line. The other thing is the motivation. What gets people in there? Well, if you have showers and you have laundry facilities and you have bathrooms and you have clean water and you have food and you have all blankets and all the stuff that they need, then why would they choose to be outside? Right. And if they know that that's what's necessary to get those advantages, then they do follow the rules. They follow the code of conduct. And that's what brings about the success.
And builds community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
We have another question from the audience. Abby Samuels. Abby, welcome.
Thank you. My question is housing first. I really believe in that model. And I don't know if you addressed it. I was a little late for this as far as the budget. And for me, everything seems like a Band-Aid over the real issue, which is the housing crisis. And getting homes is a lot more inexpensive for the taxpayer, but not necessarily for, they don't have a specific budget. So when I spoke to Don Lane, our ex-mayor, he said that there was not, you can't just take money out. It might be saving the hospital money, but then we don't have money in a specific bucket. So Tristia, I'd like you to answer that. And the sleeping ban, even though that might be addressed. That's a temporary solution. That's helpful. That's what the Freedom Sleepers are fighting for. But I really doubt that the City Council will vote for it. It'll probably be brought up and dismissed. And I think if they do vote for it, it's only because they're fearful of a lawsuit.
Thank you. Tristia, your response about housing first models and that?
Well, we know that housing first models work, they're effective, and they save taxpayer dollars. For an elected official not to be compelled just by that is a little surprising. But if we're talking about trying to identify a specific pot of money where you can find funding for housing, my response would initially be, I have yet to find a city council member that has a good sense of just how much they're paying to criminalize homelessness and to address homelessness through the sweeping of encampments and pushing people from place to place, and what that means in terms of their public works budget, what that means for the Department of Transportation budget, how many expenses are related to law enforcement, not just the original case, but particularly in the case of tickets, for example.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Someone might receive a ticket for sleeping outside, and there may be an expense that can be tracked there. But what about the failure to pay that ticket and the incarceration that may result from that? Is that also being tracked such that we have a sense of what the actual cost of just issuing that ticket that somebody would never have a reasonable likelihood of being able to pay is, and what that is to the city? Taxpayers, I think, care about their money being wasted, and you can bet that an elected official is going to start identifying pockets and will be devoting money to housing if it's deemed a priority, and it can be a priority if the public demands it as such.
And I know that one of the things that Huff has done really very faithfully over time is track tickets, and not so much by putting a dollar value on them, but just the administrative cost of what happens if somebody gets a ticket. Then that ticket has to be written by a peace officer or a park ranger. Then it has to go to the city attorney, who has to process it, and that process has to go over to our county building, and it has to be processed there. And if that person who gets the ticket decides that they want to go to court, they want to disqualify a commissioner and go into Superior Court, that's an additional cost. So all of that money, and I've suggested that time and again to anybody who will listen, that the cost of criminalization far exceeds what it would cost to not criminalize.
I think a bigger cost is a cost to the individual, because the person that receives the ticket now is burdened by this, and this is a reason for people to get arrested because they failed to pay or failed to appear, and now there's a warrant for their arrest, and then this spiral starts happening. And also at the time of the arrest, they get all their belongings taken from them, stolen basically, and they have no way to claim it again. And they could have their ID in there. It takes another $28, another 2 to 7 weeks to get that, and you got to get that before you get your Social Security card. And what if your birth certificate is in there and you were born in some other state, and it's not easy to get? And what happens if your medication is in there and all of a sudden you're off of medication and it's a controlled substance, and you go back to your pharmacist and say, hey, I lost my stuff in my sweep, I need 3 more months, and they go like, hey, we can't do that. We already gave it to you once, so you got to wait 3 more months before we give it to you again. All this impacts everything, the whole thing. And we're talking again about other things that impact renters' rights, tenants' rights, eviction processes, the whole, in San Jose, I don't know about here, they have a no-cause eviction. So a landlord can evict you for absolutely no reason whatsoever. If they feel that they can rent that apartment for more money, you're gone, right? So all these things, all these issues come in. Again, the mobile home parks and everything, and those are all things that I'm involved with. I don't just involve myself with homelessness because it's all interconnected.
Of course, yeah.
You can't separate them.
And Tristia, I was going to ask, has the National Law Center participated in lawsuits that seek to get back possessions that have been confiscated without due process, that kind of thing? As I know, there have been several lawsuits around, at least California that I know of, where they've successfully sued when possessions have been confiscated with absolutely no notice and no recourse to get them back.
Over the course of the Law Center's 25 years, we've litigated a number of cases on criminalization issues, and we've also filed amicus briefs. And so even where we are not leading the charge, we are weighing in, usually on the policy ramifications of confiscating people's belongings and leaving them with no ability to prove their identity, and explaining what that means in terms of barriers toward escaping homelessness, accessing housing, accessing services, accessing employment, and all of the other things that everybody must access in order to be self-sufficient. More recently, our focus has been on litigating toward an enforceable right to housing in this country.
Interesting.
And so we are looking at criminalization policies, but also on how these laws, not just on how they violate the Constitution, but also how they violate a city's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, and how the mass incarceration of people with mental health conditions may violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what that means. And so they're all legal strategies that we're looking at now.
And it's interesting, we were talking about nexus and crossover and whatnot. I was a couple of months back elected the chairman of the board of directors for MHCAM, which is our local mental health clients action network that provides services to many of the people who have mental or behavioral challenges in Santa Cruz County, Santa Cruz County, and fully 40% of those clients that we have are homeless. So that's just another example of that.
We were talking, or I was mentioning a minute ago or some time ago, that we need to form broader coalitions, and that's, nice generalization. But I think the focus on even so simple an issue as the sleeping ban can have a mobilizing impact because it is so basic, and because it is so obvious, and because it is such a necessity that the denial of that basic right by the city council or by the county government can become a kind of a focal point for a kind of protest that draws in people in a broader way
Right.
to demand the housing rights, to demand basic rights to, you know, fair wages, to demand a whole series of rights that we need to demand, I think, to really progress. And so I think going after the sleeping ban, which has always been, and maybe I'm simply trying to justify what I've done over my life. Which could be.
Perhaps.
It's possible.
But this is your opportunity to do so.
Indeed, and live on TV. But I think that was one of the reasons that it attracted me as an issue a long time ago, is because it seemed like you can't, I mean, when any ordinary person hears about this, and many Santa Cruzans haven't, they say, what? You can't sleep at night? You mean, well, there certainly are shelters that say, no, there's not. Oh, well, then the next thing is, oh, well, this is only if there's bad behavior. No, it's not. It's completely dependent upon whether there's a complaint from somebody who doesn't want this person in their neighborhood, regardless of their behavior. And so I'm thinking that here in Santa Cruz, the focus perhaps for folks who want to engage in protest in the next few months until this wonderful day arrives when the issue appears on the city council agenda and is voted down,
Right.
as it probably will be. What's the next step we have to ask ourselves in reacting to this in a way that the council, which is, I think, largely listening to a minority, a bigoted minority. I don't think the majority of Santa Cruzans want to arrest people for sleeping at night. I really don't, in spite of the fact that we've become more gentrified, more conservative, more of a moneyed community. Don't have the answer to that, but I raised the question.
Robert?
Okay, well, there's two ways that all societies have dealt with people that they consider undesirable. It's either banishment or containment. And you can use a combination of those things. So if people don't want you someplace, they banish you from being that place. And if that doesn't work, then what they do is they try to contain you. So one of the things that you guys could try to do is say, okay, well, instead of just saying ban sleeping, or remove the ban from sleeping everywhere, identify certain areas where it would be okay to do so. And you might, it's like the elephant. How do you eat the elephant? You one bite at a time. So I appreciate what you're saying is that, the sleeping ban is certainly one thing, but how you approach that might make a big difference, because we ran into the same problem in Santa Clara County where they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to just stop sweeps altogether. So what we started talking about was, okay, how about in certain areas? Okay, let's kind of ignore it in this industrial or commercial area or whatever, or at certain times of day or night, so that people would be able to have a rest for the night.
Did that work?
For some areas, yes, it did. There are
Well,
a number of people.
and you'd be interested to know that your moderator this evening, Rabbi Phil Posner, and partially myself as well, have suggested to council that they have staff identify places that people can safely sleep.
Right.
And we haven't gotten a whole lot of traction with that, but I think that it's something that we should push forward, and perhaps in conjunction with a lawsuit. That if you have a lawsuit in town that challenges a camping ban, they're going to want well, when that camping ban is found to be unconstitutional, what's that going to look like? Is it going to look? Is there some model that exists that the community wants to know?
That's right.
Because they're not going to be able to go to the court and say, you can't possibly find this unconstitutional because we don't want people sleeping in our backyards. But that's not the point. The point is going to be, when they found unconstitutional, are they going to be sleeping in their backyards? And that's what they're afraid of.
I think you're right. So there are so many strategies that can be employed. There are policy suggestions that can be made, the litigation strategy that can get people to the table and grab their attention and get them to seriously consider policy,
Right.
organizing around issues that can bring a cross-section of people together. And I absolutely agree that the basic act of sleeping and criminalizing what is unarguably the most harmless of all human activities is something that a large, broad base of people can organize around. Another really important part is the outreach and communication strategies, and really getting the media, and not just the traditional media sources, but also the social media, to talk about this issue and dispel some of the myths. There isn't available shelter space. Right. These are the people who are being affected, particularly when you use a really sympathetic subpopulation to tell the story. Sometimes that can garner more attention. We know, for example, that veterans right now are, in terms of lip service, there's no single subpopulation that people claim to care more about. Veterans are disproportionately homeless, particularly post 9/11 veterans who are females are experiencing disproportionate homelessness. Telling the story through their lens can compel people who may not otherwise be compelled.
And I know that there is a mayor's initiative here in Santa Cruz County, to house every homeless vet, and which I am, my reaction to that is, well, let's house the vets we have, and the solution to that problem is let's not make any more vets. You know, so.
Here, here.
And that would be, I think, a reasonable solution to that. I think, John, you tell me we got another minute or so? This has been a terrific conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing all of you, and particularly over at the workshop and forum that we had at the RCNV. That was fantastic. Really, thank you for coming into our community and giving us your insight, your expertise, and we're hoping that whatever questions you may have about our homeless community and the uniqueness that we believe it has would be satisfied to the point that you may actually want to participate in a lawsuit here, because we would certainly welcome that. So Tristia, thank you so much for all of your good works, and please relay that to all of your comrades at the National Law Center. We appreciate it. Robert, thanks so much. Opening my eyes to the things that I was in law practice in Santa Clara, so I spent a lot of time in Santa Clara County, so I'm aware of Santa Clara County as an entity, but I wasn't really as aware of the homeless community over there as I should have been. So thank you for all of your insight and bringing us not only some awareness, but some solutions as well, and helpful to us. And Robert, always great to have you on here to...
That's why you happen so often.
and then you could tell people exactly why you've been doing what you've been doing for so long, and I hope that was a satisfactory answer to everybody. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
And, yeah,
Thank you for having us.
my pleasure. This has been Steve Pleich. Thanks for watching this edition of Voice from the Village, and tune in a couple weeks from now when we'll be talking about another important issue in our community, and we'll see you next time on Voices from the Village. Thanks a lot and good night.